All right, I am going to share my screen. And I hope that you can see everything. Okay. All right, so I'm going to talk to you about questions in DataViz. And so this is me. So thank you so much for the introduction. My day job is a BI lead at JLL. So what that means is I'm responsible for data visualizations and reports for our business. So I try and sort of keep them business-like. I'm also involved quite a lot in the enablement side of things, which means we help with the training and the internal data community. I really just sort of try and get everyone focused on getting some really good business reporting and dashboards. I love that element of what I do. Usually when I sort of come out and speak at events, which I love to do, it's usually with a different hat on, if you like. So I'm a Tableau Zen Master. I'm really honored to have been awarded that 3 times so far. So Tableau is my data visualization tool of choice, but that doesn't matter for this talk. I'm not going to be talking about Tableau in particular. But what it means, that the Zen Master just means it's kind of a community award. So it means I love data visualization. I love to talk about it. I love to share my ideas, some of which are sort of quite the opposite to what you would usually do on a business dashboard. And so I love to sort of talk and promote it, and I love to blog about it as well. And there's my my blog, Questions in DataViz, and hence the why I'm using that title. Also, just, I mean, this talk isn't about this, but I feel I should at least mention Viz for Social Good there, something I'm a director of, I'm quite passionate about. You can go to vizforsocialgood.com. It's a non-profit where we basically try to help other non-profits see and understand their data. So it's a great way of volunteering and using your own visualization skills for organizations that quite often they don't have that internal knowledge. And I've also, I used to be involved, well, I still am involved, but I used to be a director of the Data Visualization Society, which is another great organization to be with. It's such a good sort of internal community where you can find out all sorts of things. And that's initially sort of how I know Lali and Nuno from Forset. So again, thank you for inviting me down here. So why questions in DataViz? I mean, apart from the fact that it's kind of, how I branded my blog, I often found that I wanted to challenge the norm. I was at the stage where I loved my BI tool, Tableau, and what it could do, but I also loved seeing what other people did out there in other tools. I love to see some of the more creative personal data visualizations out there as well. And I sort of found that really each time I wanted to try something different or emulate something, I usually had to ask a question. I usually had to ask, is this the right thing to do? Is this going to be confusing my audience? Do I mind if this confuses my audience? All these kind of things. So everything kind of came from a question where it was, I really wanted to decide, what can my tool do that goes beyond the sort of standard rules? And by tool, okay, partly I mean the tool I have in front of me, which is Tableau, but partly I mean this tool, the tool of my own creativity, my brain, or my understanding of the kind of things we should be doing in data visualization. So recently, in a foreword to a book or a sort of collection of articles called Data Visualization in Society. This was written by Alberto Cairo. Many of you will know Alberto. He's absolutely sort of industry leading when it comes to thought pieces and opinions, in particular his series of books. And he said, do you agree or disagree? Reason why, argue, establish a conversation, write and publish. And these are all the things that, sort of without realizing, that I like to do. I like to sort of see what the status quo is. I like to come up with an opinion or a thought, one side or the other side or both sides of an argument, and just just at least establish that conversation. It's very rarely a case of black and white or a sort of simple answer. Write and publish, well, as has been alluded to, that's what I want to do very soon. But just sort of, as it says, be open to further responses and critiques, and really just sort of get a conversation going. And he said that's how philosophy begins. Well, I don't know about starting a new philosophy, but that's sort of how your own brand or your own style or your own sort of ideas within data visualization can sort of can blossom. So I took a lot of heart from that. Anytime you agree with Alberto Cairo, you're onto a good thing. And this is a slide that I've stolen from Steve Wexler, who's one of three great Tableau Zen masters who've written the big book of dashboards, among other things. And they also do a great online series called Chart Chat, and they have some great discussions and opinions on data visualization. And Steve will always say, you are encouraged to disagree, because it's very rare that rules are black and white or principles are yes and no. And just like Alberto said in that previous slide, it's that discussion that generates not only debates, it generates your own way of doing things, and it generates some great data visualization, in my opinion. All right, so what I want to do, I want to sort of theme the majority of this session around several kind of questions, and I'll be asking you to take part. Now, most of these questions are framed so that the answer could be yes, or the answer could be no, or the answer could be, I don't know, or technically it depends. It depends is a great data visualization answer. And I'll be honest, it's the answer to most questions, and you can usually then at least back up or explain or add greater context to why the answer might be it depends. So I'm going to ask you some questions. I'm actually not going to give you that it depends answer in the middle, because it just it makes us think, right, do I think yes or do I think no? There's absolutely no right answers. So what I want you to try and do is go to this site, slido.com. So you can do that on your mobile, or you can do it on your laptop on another window. You don't have to sign up, register, do anything like that. Basically, it's just going to, as we go through, it's going to ask you a whole load of poll questions, yes or no. And when you do that, I think it asks for a reference number at the top of the screen there, and that's where you can put in 117309. Now, I'd be pretty sure by the fact that the page generated that nice QR code for me that if you want to put your camera in front of that particular QR code, that will take you to slido.com as well. So I'll leave that up on screen for a little bit, although I think it will continually give that reminder as to the page. And so what I'm going to do, I'm actually going to ask a couple of questions first. This is just to to make sure we're connected and we've got it working and we've got the right number and that kind of thing. So just a couple of warm-up questions, which is, which country are you attending from? And hopefully yes. Okay, so this we can see the results come in. Oh, that's cool. Armenia straight away. I think I need to answer this one myself. I just want to say, actually, I made this mistake when I tested it. You can, I don't know if you can even see this on here. At the top, you can see Q&A and you can see polls. If Q&A is different, and we might use that later as well, but so if you put your answer in the Q&A, that's kind of a separate thing that comes as a question through to me. But what you need to do is go onto the polls bit there, I think. So sometimes it moves you onto the Q&A tab by mistake. Well, this is great. I love the way the word cloud works. We've got Georgia, we've got Narnia there just through the back of my wardrobe. I wonder if I've done this wrong, because I thought I just entered UK, but I'm not sure if that worked. maybe it did. Maybe it doesn't let me do it as the organizer. Not to worry. All right, thank you, everybody. I can see we've got about 49 people there, 50. That's a nice number for our numbers and percentages later. It's so exciting to be talking and meeting people from so many different countries around the world as well. Hello, Ireland. You're probably my nearest neighbour. All right, so I'll move on. And just one more question before we go into the yes/no questions I want to ask. How much data visualization experience do you have? And while you're putting those in, I really want to say it absolutely doesn't matter for this talk. I guess it's aimed at sort of beginner or people who are really have only just started, because you're kind of at the point where these questions are coming up and where you're sort of wondering what some of these things mean. But I mean, I think I come myself at about 5 to 6 years experience. I don't have a huge amount, but it's great to see a really good range through there. And I hope this is going to be useful to all of you. Okay, so we have beginner just sort of topping up across some experience, more experienced. Okay, once we're up to 45 or so, that sounds good. And all right, this is my first question. So this is my first DataViz question, if you like. Is it ever okay to use pie charts? All right, and I mean a bit of context to this while you're voting. Let's put my vote in as well. A lot of folks don't like pie charts, and you might see pie charts used well. You might see pie charts used really badly. You might consider there's usually better ways of displaying data than pie charts. Yeah, well, it's really up to you. I don't want to skew your answer, but that's why I ask it. It's a top topic of discussion amongst DataViz people, especially. All right, but 85% think yes, it's okay. So here's a pretty good pie chart. Do you like that one? It's impactful. I should have given a warning, actually. I'm sorry if this is giving people headaches to look at, or it's a bit psychedelic. I don't even know what this is. Popularity of emojis by the looks of it, and the 12 or so that they had room to put around the side. Yeah, that's fun. I think maybe if you thought all pie charts were like this, we'd have even different numbers. And what about this one? This one's a little bit blurry on my screen, so it's a bit blurry for you, but I think you can pretty much see it's a simple pie chart, only 3 segments, so that's okay. And it nicely explains from Fox News how the 193% of the population want to vote. Never mind that it's 3D, and I think that 60 looks bigger than that 70, but you might say that's the least of its problems. So these are the kind of reasons that pie charts have a bit of a bum rap. But I mean, if I show you this one, first I'm going to point to the author, who is Storytelling with Data, which is an amazing book and online resource run by Cole Knaflick. And she, like many of us, has come from the background of thinking, I think she sort of jokingly says, the pie charts are evil. But she was able to come up with this one and say, well, look, if we're going to come up with a pie chart, let's do a good pie chart. Let's take the color out of it. Let's order things sensibly so that things go around sort of clockwise in the order that you would expect. Let's highlight what we want to see. Let's make sure we're using percent of a whole, which is when pie charts are okay, and that those percents always add up to 100. And I think that's a good pie chart. I think if you wanted to show survey responses as a percent of total, that's a good way as any. Yeah, you might think yes or you might think no, but I think maybe this is the kind of thing that would show that pie charts are sometimes okay. It's ironic, actually. All these yes/no questions that we're doing, 85%, 15%, I think this one was, that would probably be pretty good for a pie chart. All right, so that's my first question. My next question, should you ever truncate bar charts? And let's go on to the poll. So hopefully this has moved on to the next poll. So interesting. 62. We've got a bit more of a wide vote now. Okay, so no, I'd say it's the clear winner. I wondered if it may be a clearer winner than that. Well, that's 2/3, 1/3. We can move on from there. I think maybe if there was an "it depends" answer there, I would still err on the side of no. But I think there's I'm willing to go "it depends." All right, here's another Fox News example. If you want to see really bad data visualization, just Google and Fox News will come up. So you've probably seen this one. What would be the change if Bush tax cuts were to expire? Well, if you look at this, it looks like the percentage would absolutely, what's that, 5, 6, 8 times bigger? It would be a huge difference. In reality, there's not much of a difference at all. So that's been framed very much with the idea of biasing the audience, should we say. But there's ways around it. I don't know the ways around it are perfect, but I think they should be considered. And I think that's why, why all three answers are probably okay. This was by 3 guys, Michael Correll, Steve Franconieri, Enrico Bettini, as part of a Tableau engineering blog a few years ago. So the one on the left, this one here, we might consider, you can see, it's truncated at 40%. So this is an example of a not very good bar chart, or a not acceptable bar chart, you might say. But there's ways around it. You can perhaps show this gap here, which demonstrates that, all right, it does go down to 0%. We've just chosen not to show it. We didn't have the screen. Or you can show this blur. I haven't really seen that blur method until I researched this. But that, I don't know that I'll like it, but I do appreciate that it does a job and it explains what's happened there, again, without having the need to go all the way down to 0. So I think there's always pretty good options, whether you agree with them or not. I think it's well worth being aware of these when you have the discussion as to whether you think it's all right to truncate your bar chart. All right, so should every visualization tell a story? Let's try the next question. So very much a buzzword, data storytelling. Everyone likes data storytelling, and it's very much a sought after quality. I certainly. Well, let's see what the answers are. I think telling a story in a visualization is a great skill. Telling it well, I think it's generally a very good thing to do. But should every visualization tell a story? That's the question. So yeah, again, sort of more or less 2/3, 1/3, maybe a bit more coming towards 60-40 there. We've managed to not even get them up to 100% there. I think that's rounding, isn't it? Okay, that looks better. So, all right, thank you for those. So when I want to demonstrate storytelling, this is usually my go-to viz, which I think is from the Washington Post. And it's all about the battling infectious disease in the 20th century. And it really is telling a story from left to right. It's a great metaphor, which looks kind of like Petri dish as it is. And it's showing the prevalence of measles, very prevalent really across all 50 of the US states. And then what happens fairly suddenly after the vaccine is introduced. Now, it's not a perfect viz. The color and the legend might be sort of questionable when you see how much it changes from 0 to what's that, less than 1K compared to the rest. But as a striking piece of data visualization, and it's something that tells the story. You can see the before, you can see the after, you can see the climax, if you like, or the point where the story changes. I think this does a really good example of data storytelling. And it's also important that it wouldn't be a good chart without the boring bit at the top. So not boring bit, but without the proper explanation and title that shows you exactly what it is you're looking at. But it's interesting because I thought, well, almost all data visualizations are they tell a story in some kind of way, whether you sort of go out to do it or whether you don't. And I put this question out to some of my followers the other day. Has anyone got a good data visualization that absolutely doesn't tell a story? It's just a data visualization. It's just the data for the viewers to see. And this was the first one was given to me. And excuse me if I look at my notes here. This was the story of every noise. And this is Spotify data. I've even managed to find some Georgian alternative music for you in there, in amongst a million other kinds. And it's just a pure text visualization. Every categorization they could think of in Spotify music, and believe me, it goes up above that and below it as well, is classified. Now, I don't know if you aficionados of Georgian alternative music will agree with me or not, but the further down it is, the more organic the music. The further up, the more mechanical. The more to the left, the more dense and atmospheric it is, and the more to the right, the more dense, the more spiky and bouncy it is. So I'm sure Georgian alternative music, I've always thought is not as bouncy as Ghanaian pop, but it's a lot bouncier than classic Indonesian rock. That's kind of all you can do with this data visualization. It doesn't tell you a story, but that doesn't matter. It's fun, and you can find all sorts of things out in there if you want to. And here's another example. This is from Shirley Wu. Shirley and Nadi Bremer have both written, they've been involved in the Data Sketches project, which is now an amazing book as well. And it's full of beautiful data visualization projects. And I knew that I could look there for sort of pure data visualizations which show you stuff, not necessarily in a story. This is Film Flowers, just visualizing a whole load of recent films in flower format. And elsewhere in the visualization, there's a key as to what this means, but I don't think it has to tell a story. I think you just enjoy it and appreciate the aesthetic of it. All right, so the next one, should we always maximize the data ink ratio? And here we go. So most of you might have heard of the data ink ratio. Some of you might not have. So it's a concept very much, I don't know if it was invented, but it's very much promoted by Edward Tufte, one of the sort of main early protagonists of data visualization, you think. And it's all about the ink that's on the page, if you like, or the equivalent of what's on your screen. The majority of it, or as much as possible, should be showing data, and you should minimize what's showing metadata or showing other stuff, if you like. So that's what maximizing data ink ratio is about. And it's all about then giving you a sort of clean, clear, crisp, non-cluttered chart. All right, now I'm really interested to see, we're up at 80% think, no, we shouldn't always maximize the data ink ratio. So yeah, I think more and more these days, people are either advocates of Tufty or they respectfully disagree. And I see more of you respectfully disagree. I actually respectfully disagree as well, but I do. It is a principle that I follow before I then decide, well, which bits of this do I not want to follow? So I'll show you what I mean by that. This, apologies, that's just sort of cut off slightly. I think that's my display when it maximizes. But this is the story behind a line by Italian designer Federico Fragapane. And it's pretty much only the line. It's the line that shows the journey of an asylum seeker from Côte d'Ivoire, Ivory Coast, going to that's Verona. It's cut off for me, but the port in Italy where they found being trying to enter Europe. And this has got a very high data ink ratio. It just hasn't got very much of either. There's not much data. There's not much ink. The empty space, it's bleak, but it emphasizes it, and I think it does it in a lovely way. You could argue that this bit here, which I think is every bit as important to the visualization, is metadata, or it's unnecessary. At least it's changing that ratio. But I think within the part of the actual viz, it does a gorgeous job. This is one of mine. I love the fact that I've got one of my line charts into a John Schwabish book on how to make good charts, because I don't very often make good charts that get into data visualization books. But I've tried to use the best principles here. I've taken all the grid lines out, and I've really sort of minimized what's in there, just focused on one simple line chart. Bit of fun, I chose the popularity of my name over the years. But I then think even if you decide you want to follow that advice, it's then worth thinking, right, well, do I want to put stuff back in? And I did. I think it's better for having this stuff here, some of the animation. You know, why is there a big peak of the name Neil in 1969? Well, that one's quite easy, because of Neil Armstrong. So I think you can minimize the ratio up to a point, but it's always good to add to it if you feel that's the right thing to do. And this, I just wanted to show you this. This is the chart that Edward Tufte gets really quite angry about. When he mentions sort of the minimizing the data ink ratio, sorry, maximizing the data ink ratio, he mentions chart junk, and chart junk is in his words, it's what doesn't need to be in the chart. And you can pretty much say that everything apart from the thick red line comes into chart junk there. Personally, I think it's a genius. I love the way there's all those grid lines that you don't need, but that are making the fishnets, if you like, there. And yeah, this is crude, but it's memorable. If you were to ask me, hey Neil, what were diamond sales like 40 years ago? It wouldn't take me it wouldn't take me a long time to cast my mind back to this and remember, and I'd be able to go, oh, well, yeah, I remember there was a big peak and then it dropped again. And so that's sort of down to this. So it can break every DataViz rule in the book. It can break a few taste rules or design rules or graphics rules, but it's impactful and it helps you remember. So that's the way I like to consider that. All right, so I want to talk about curved bar charts now. Should we avoid curved bar charts because they're too misleading? So in terms of curved bar... I didn't know that one. I don't know if you could hear that. Alexa over there tried to answer the question as well. And she said, I don't know, which I think is probably, I think it's probably quite fitting. So a curved bar chart, as soon as, let's say we've got sort of three or four bars here, as soon as you start to curve, you've got a much longer bar on the top or on the outside versus on the inside that might be representing the same kind of number. If you were to look at a curved bar chart and straighten it out, usually you get completely wildly different results. And I would deny they are misleading. I guess the question is, what do we do? Should we leave them out? So yeah, it's fun to see. Being from the UK, I panic every time I see something is 52%, 48%. That's where a lot of of our big recent polls have ended up, and look what happened. Thank you. Thank you, somebody, for voting and taking it off that ratio. But we're not far off 50-50 there anyway, which is cool. All right, I shall move on. So here's an example. This is an example from me. It was actually for Business for Social Good, which I mentioned earlier. Our client at the time was a department of the United Nations, and they had a whole load of metrics to show. And I did this. I put my hand up. I did this. I came up with these very colourful, double encoded, multiple versions of curved bar charts. And in particular, sort of look at this one here. The numbers that I'm trying to show really close, 14, 13, 13, 13, 12. And yet, so they're kind of close and how far around they've gone, but look at the different size of the bars, really confusing. But the reason I did this was because that's what they asked for. They said, if you do bar charts, we really like curved bar charts. Please, will you do that? And they said, if you use colors, please, will you use these colors? And there was a large, colorful color palettes, and you may recognize them as the colors you often see in SDG, Sustainable Development Goal visualizations. So that's why I've done it. And I think they were much appreciated. I don't think I particularly am overly proud of this, because for all the fact that I like to be different, I don't think it's a very good chart particularly. But I think I think under the circumstances, it's an interesting chart, and it fitted with the branding and the style that they were interested in. So you might see this and think, well, I don't think you should really do it. What about this? I wish I was down there and on the front, and I could say, hands up who recognizes this, and I'm sure some of you will. These are two charts from the exhibition in 1901 in Paris from W.E.B. Du Bois, and he was an American, a Black American college professor who was commissioned to put out these data visualizations, all sort of about the Black population of Georgia, and sort of how some of the demographics have changed, how they were only finally coming out of slavery. And I won't surprise you to know that I love these as well. But you could look at these on their own and think they were absolutely ridiculous. In particular, maybe this one on the right. You've got your four colors, and it's just, he's decided to do one long one, one really small one going back on itself, one another small yellow one, and the red is so large he's coiled it round and round and round. But for me, that's okay. For me, that's striking. These are what draw you from one room of a gallery to another. They didn't have very much room to display this. These are what draw you into thinking, my goodness, what's this? This looks interesting. And you can see from that the red number is much bigger than the others. And I think that's probably all he wanted to show. You can't get a great amount of analytics from that. But I think the team knew exactly what they were doing. And to me, these are kind of iconic. And so they've really sort of achieved what they wanted to achieve. The chart should easily be understood in 2 seconds. Do you agree? So we're talking about, and let's go to the votes. We're talking about seeing a chart and instantly knowing what it's talking about, instantly being able to interpret it. And again, sort of think of in this day and age, we're scrolling through, I know I do, scrolling through my Twitter feed and things like that, or scrolling through, and if you see a chart, you really don't necessarily have that much time to understand it, or you're a busy business exec and somebody hands you a chart on an iPad and you want to understand it straight away. So that's what that quote is on about. And again, a nice, interesting split, so roughly 2 to 1 there, just changing around a little bit. Okay. And I suppose I was thinking about this quote here. This quote, going back a bit now, from Seth Godin. And when he was talking about charts or graphs in particular, he said, I think you're trying to make a point in 2 seconds for people who are I spelled too wrong. For people who are too lazy to read the 40 words underneath. And I think there's a lot of sense in that, but I think again, we're talking context. And very often, I tried to think of a chart which is easily understandable in 2 seconds, and it wasn't that easy. When I found this online, I think you can get this in under 2 seconds. It's one bar chart. It's the 4 parties in the United Kingdom, I think just before council elections, projected share of the vote. That you can understand. You can understand that in less than 2 seconds, especially if you're familiar with the UK, because you even see the colours and you know what they mean, just like Republican and Democrats and things like that in the UK. But I mean, it's not easy. And this is one of mine. This was a Make of a Monday one of mine, which is a sort of community project where you get sort of different data sets to practice things out on. So this was about sugar consumption. I've tried to follow the rules. I've tried to put one chart in, make it clear, put some really, well, there's 40 words at the top there, so maybe that doesn't help. It's kind of okay. I think you can understand it, but I think even something simple like this probably takes a little bit more than 2 seconds. You think, well, hang on, what's that line? Oh, okay, that's the target. No, it's not. That's with the change from consumption in 2008, 29. And it takes a little bit longer even for a chart that's quite simple. But maybe the 2 second thing is arbitrary. But what about this? This is one of mine. And I'll say straight off, I do not want people to read and understand this in 2 seconds. Often, if you want to design something, and this is never, okay, it's about kings and queens of England, but it's never the kind of thing that you're going to give to your boss or to an exec or to a news report or whatever, have something that wants to be really understood. This is an interesting, I think, visualization that I want people to enjoy. I want people to see it and get the impact within 2 seconds. So you might see it and think, oh, that's bright, it's orange and yellow, it looks like an explosion, or it looks like a flower, I'm not sure. But then I want people to take time to read it and enjoy it. And you might see this about kings and queens of England, think, I'm not interested in that, move on. That's okay. But sort of within this, you really have to sort of look a little bit longer to see how the visualization takes shape. I don't want to get into too much detail. You probably might not be able to see too well right at the ends of each of these. The sort of peaks for all of them are a particular king and queen of England, and the time scale is going round clockwise there. And it's basically just a line which is which grows in length as they get older, and starts off yellow while they are not king or queen, and then goes orange once they are queen or king. And so it's one not to understand in 2 seconds, far from it, but it's one to sort of digest. Better example, something like this, which was from Sam Parsons, who visualized, he visualized all the projects submitted to Viz for Social Good. And it takes 2 seconds to look at it and go, whoa, you can't, you probably wouldn't even start to look at it for 10, 20, 30 seconds, I don't know. Then once you do, and you give yourself the time, you think, right, this is amazing. It's got everything, it's got all the visualizations here. It's got every explanation for every particular part of what the circles mean, what is called the candy floss bit mean, what's the significance of the length of these circles and the size. I won't go to all the details now. This is not one for 2 seconds. It's not one for even 2 minutes. It's okay to design for a particular audience who you want to spend time looking at and enjoying, I think. And I think this probably is typical of me. The majority of talks I do, I usually crowbar this quote in everywhere because it's very true, and it's typical of me. It's from Amanda Cox of the New York Times Graphics, and she says, as I'm sure you can see, there's a strand of the DataViz world that argues that everything could be a bar chart. And there are some people who argue that everything should be a bar chart. Well, I think that's okay. I would put a counter argument. And she says that's possibly true, but possibly a world without joy. And that's, I think, what it comes down to. If I want to have fun, if I want to stretch my creativity, but if I also want to learn more technical skills, I'm not going to sit and do a bar chart with everything if it's something that I'm doing for my own personal enjoyment and gain and things like that. So it's, yeah, I think, you know, the kings and queens I showed you, that could easily have been a bar chart or a Gantt chart to just, you know, ages and lengths and birth and death dates. But it's always, depending on context, you always have the possibility to consider an alternative. And here's an example. I've got this behind me, and I tend to think, you know, wouldn't it be cool if I could make a data visualization that would kind of look okay on a wall? And maybe no one else wants it on the wall, but I don't mind putting it on my own wall. Again, something which the encoding in it is so deep that I just want it to come as sort of abstract pictures, and then you can look into it, then you can enjoy it, then you can hover over the interactive version and look at every number one of the 1980s. And I think I'm showing my age by the very fact that the 1980s was the decade I picked there. All right, can you design your visualization first without data? So what do I mean by that? Can you have a design in your mind very sort of specifically and think, right, I'm going to do my next data visualization looking like that? So there's my question. We'll go back to Slido. All right, again. We have no winning out slightly, but quite a lot of yeses. So let's leave that at 55-45. Thank you again. Oh, we had a big change there. Just as I clicked off, it got closer to 50-50. And there's no yes or no right answer. The answer to that probably ought to be, hang on, how did I phrase it? It should probably be no, you can't, because you've got to have your data first. And I think, well, here's an example. I love this. This is a scatter plot by, it appeared in the Upshot, and that's voting in 2012. So apologies that that's been cut off. And it just wonderfully shows among demographics the differences of voting between Democrats and Republicans. So we've got percent Democrats, the more people voted Democrat on the right, and you can see every single one of these green categories were far more likely to vote Democrat than the pink categories. And then you see down here, oh, you have to excuse me, I don't know if you can see the bottom left, the green categories are black voters, and the pink categories are white. So it's a way of slicing it where you can really see an amazing story within that data. But that needed data from all 50 states. It needed data from, all the different counties as well. But it also relied on the fact that basically in the US, you can only vote for two people, Democrats or Republicans. So you have the option to do something really cool like this. There's no way that you can really think, oh, let's put in UK voting and see if I can get it to look like that. It just won't happen because there isn't a 50-50 split, or there isn't a 50-50 option of the main parties. There isn't the same the race or ethnic mixture. There's just so many reasons why it'd be really difficult to do that for anything else. But the reason I put this in is it's not necessarily something you should do, but it's something I actually like to do. And it's something that as I did, it really improved my creativity and gave me ideas I otherwise wouldn't have thought of. So this, just a couple of years into my journey, I don't even know what you would call the thing on the left. It was a bit of art on the wall, faded in a Manchester hotel. You know what sort of hotel art looks like. And I think I made a bet to my friend, or had a joke. I said, that looks like one of my data visualizations. And then I thought, well, let's actually sort of follow up on that. And then the next time I'd an available data set of Irish whiskey sales there, I thought, how can I make it look like that particular data visualization? Now, I couldn't make it look exactly like it because I wanted it to be driven by real data. And that is driven by real data. It's a set of Irish whiskey sales. I do have an additional page on my visualization that explains what each of the lines and each of the circles mean. But basically, it's like a timeline for, 10, 12 different countries. And I had great fun doing that. And there's no way I would have thought of a timeline with bits cut out and bits added on to represent anything. And although it's only a bit of fun, it was really a great exercise in thinking, well, I wonder if it's possible to actually have the design first and then come up with a data set which kind of fits it. And if you do that, the world really is your oyster. You can come up with a data visualization that looks like almost anything. And here's one, it's a silly one. I think I knew I was looking at Sesame Street data, but I wanted my visualization to look like Big Bird. So I thought, well, how can I do that? I think I need, I don't know, kind of a radial lollipop charts, and I need some of the answers to be bigger than others. And I got lucky. I came up with something which more or less worked, and that's what I came up with. The design came absolutely first before I even knew I had any data. But to make it sort of slightly more serious, the thinking behind this comes from this slide, Data Humanism, from Georgia Lupi, who's now a partner at Pentagram. You may know her work from Dear Data, which I would just, I find so inspirational. Some of the things that that she did there in the project with Stephanie Posavec, where she drew hand-drawn data visualizations about the sort of smallest, most human disaggregated things. And anyway, in her TED talk, these are all the things she says about how to flip things around, how to think about how data has been done in the past, and how to maybe challenge and think, well, how can I do things differently? And it was this bit here, data-driven design, which she flipped around to design-driven data. And she may not have actually been expecting grown men to do Big Bird visualizations like that, but it made me think, yeah, that is a thing. And it made me think, always challenge the different perceived ways of doing things. Okay, and this is the last one I have of these questions, which is, what about maps? Do you think maps have to be truly accurate and representative? Because otherwise you might think they might be confusing or misleading, I guess. So on to this question. Do you think all maps must be truly accurate and representative? I appreciate most of these are kind of leading questions, because by now you probably realized that I'm going to come up with examples of yes and examples of no and examples of maybe. And you might think otherwise afterwards, or you might not. But I think that's interesting. That's sort of what we'd expect. So we've got nearly 3/4 thinking, yeah, maps, they should be truly accurate and representative. All right, this was a last minute move just before I change on. So here's, you've seen the world map. This is no different to many. It's quite basic. And I mean, what do I say about world maps? This is the Mercator projection. So if you learn about maps and projections, all projections have their pros and their cons as to how accurate or how sort of representative they are. Most people are perhaps not a fan of Mercator projection because it's really going to emphasize, you can imagine that these bits up in the north, like the size of Svalbard and Greenland and even Canada, are huge, much more than they should be. And anywhere that's sort of much closer to the equator is going to sort of be smaller. But that notwithstanding, I think this map shows a lot of other difficulties that you find in map. Labeling small countries. I look for, here's Georgia, and I'm afraid Georgia is GEOR dot, and there wasn't room to put it in Georgia, so they put it just just above and pointed it down. And borrowed Azerbaijan next to you just gets to be as. And so there's going to be lots of examples of things like that, even countries of all sorts of sizes. Most of Africa, you see, seems to be labeled in the Atlantic Ocean or the Indian Ocean. So there's all sorts of things going on. And finally, poor old Caribbean and Central America, I think the designers took one look and gave up and thought these countries are too small for me. So I don't really know why they had a good attempt at the small countries in other parts of the world, but not there. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with this map at all, but I think it illustrates some of the difficulties of being representative, and some of the difficulties of dealing with large and small countries. But that's okay. But now I want to show you this, and actually this is the London Tube map. And when I ask people for a visualization, that's a great visualization that doesn't tell a story, I got this reply in that category as well. And this reply was from Andy Kirk, who is, you might know as Visualizing Data. The Visualizing Data is one of the sort of most amazing resources there is online. And it's also a book as well. And it's just sort of full of everything Andy knows about data visualization, which is a lot. He's a great influence on me. But he says, this is actually a really good data visualization. It represents a whole load of jumbled up stations in London, and it really shows you how to connect them, and it connects schematically rather than exactly where everything is. And I'm from the UK, but I would be lost without this map in London. It really helps. And yet that once you're in the middle, maybe some of these stations are, I don't know, 10, 15 minutes walk apart. And once you go further out, some of these stations are miles apart. There's a lot of liberties taken with scale in order to make it fit a particular format. But it's there, it's labeled, it has color codes, it has a legend, and it has all the things that you would expect in a good data visualization. I'm not sure about the data ink ratio, but yes. But it's a map and it's not geographically representative. Well, it's representative, but it's not geographically accurate. So here, this might be interesting. I'm interested in one on the left, but I'm going to show you the one on the right first, because that's going to be a lot more familiar to many people, which represents the march on Rome. The march on Moscow from, I think it was Vilnius and back from Napoleon's troops, and that was by Charles Joseph Minard. And that's a great storytelling visualization, which I could talk more about. You see the width being representative of the size of his army, number of troops in his army as he went and returned. But that's not geographically representative, really, and it takes a few liberties. And I show it because that's very famous, and it's held up as a classic visualization by Minard. And actually, Minard, before he came up with that, he did a lot of work while he was an engineer, looking at trade flow from continent to continent. And this on the left was one of his. And well, I'm almost lost for words. You look at it and you understand things absolutely, but then you might say, well, wow, what happened to North America here? It's just sort of been flattened. And then you might look and think, well, look at the Straits of Gibraltar there. You could fit a Spain in there, but he's done it deliberately to allow a big brown trade route of the appropriate thickness to come through. Similarly between the UK and France there, and Ireland. I think we had someone from Ireland earlier. And I've got some bad news for you. It's you've gone underneath a big orange conveyor belt there. So joking aside, he took huge liberties. This is all right. This is some time ago, but we knew what the world looked like in 1864. We knew it didn't look like this. He chose to make really sort of big liberties with world and European geography in order to make his point there. I put this out of context. This is a tile map, obviously, a hexagonal tile map. And we very often see these used now, and you see these used where you're just as interested in every one constituent there to an equal level of interest, if you like. So you want to know whatever this figure is, I don't know, let's say it's Republican voters percent in Washington, as much as you want to know it in a small state like Rhode Island, and as much as you want to know it in a huge state like Texas. So it makes every constituent the same size and tries to put it roughly geographically in the right place. This was not too bad. I think that's why you see a lot of American ones. There are some things that are going to go a little bit wrong, like New York. New York is it's on this coast here, it's on the Atlantic coast, but it also, I think, borders the Great Lakes here in Canada. Now, it couldn't do both, so something had to lose out, and in this case, it's the Atlantic coast that loses out there. So you have to accept in tile maps, even that work quite well, if you look at any individual intersection or how any sort of particular pair of states or constituents are going to be in relation to each other, then there are going to be some things which are not quite right. And sometimes, this is one of mine, sometimes the story is that you want it to be distorted. So sometimes distortion is the actual story. So in that case, I won't say it's almost easier, because this had to be sort of hand designed, but these are all the medals won at 2020 by all the different countries. So it really sort of tells a story, if you like. You can see Africa is tiny, because although it had a quite good representation in athletics and running in particular, very few medals won at other sports. So you can see some slightly freak results. We've got a much bigger Japan, much bigger Great Britain, I feel sort of obliged to say. And even Georgia does pretty well there. I think Georgia comes up bigger than its size otherwise. I think a pretty healthy contingent of judo medals. And this even allowed me to get Russia is the hardest thing to put in any world map, obviously, because it's huge. Something that has to border Norway on the left and North Korea on the right, and North Korea didn't even win any medals, so that made it harder. And all these other countries as well, such as Georgia, such as Ukraine, China, Mongolia. I guess the political situation of the fact that the Russia medals were actually awarded to the Russian Olympic Committee rather than the nation gave me that kind of cheat, that I knew I couldn't fill in that space, but that I could put it in that kind of representative area. So yeah, maybe a bit of a cheat, this suggestion. It just gives me a chance to show that sometimes you deliberately want to make a distorted map to show the particular point, or distort the country size by whatever particular metric it is you want to show. All right, that's it. Now I have some ideas at this point for just sort of workshopy type things to break out. I'm conscious that it's gone 7 for you guys. There's not too much longer in this talk. So what I want to do, I'll talk through what these breakout things are. Perhaps you might want to have a look at them tonight or another day, or in lunch breaks on the next day, something like that. And then we'll leave this last bit for questions. I noticed actually I mentioned that you can put questions on the what is it there? I'm just checking my phone here. The poll, sorry, the Q&A bit of the poll. So maybe we could potentially use that as well. So anyway, if I just show you the breakout number 1 idea, which perhaps I would have been able to do if I'd have been there in front of you, was can we do some better hex tile maps than that? The resources I've given you there, gridpaint.com, that's just like an online thing which gives you a hexagonal grid there that you can just color in and design your own grid. For those of you at home or have access to a printer, you can actually Google ways to print off hexagonal graph paper, and I've done that quite often. That's a particular website that will get you to that. My idea was here's Georgia. I actually think looking at that, other than Tbilisi around the capital, most of these are kind of around about the same size, and we've got what looks like some nice sort of joins there that maybe a hex map would look quite cool. I don't know what you would, how you would go about that, but I thought that might be an interesting thing to do. So maybe if you can get hold of data that has some kind of metric that's equally representative in each state or each province, that would be a fun thing to try and do. And I think if you did that, you'd realize how with most countries and most areas, it's easy to get kind of mostly right. And then you're going to get the bits at the end where you go, how can I get that in? Because it's supposed to join that state and that state, yet I can't do it. So, but I think, I haven't seen a hex map of Georgia in the wild, so maybe that would be a fun thing to have a try. But you could do it to any country or any of your own countries or states that you're familiar with. And even this is the best I've got for the world, and the world as a hex tile map looks awful. And you'd expect it to. You've got I don't know. You've got Russia as one hexagon there with the same. And you've got Kiribati with one hexagon there. The difference in sizes really comes as a challenge. Yeah, look at North America here. Canada and USA and Mexico, 3 tiny ones on the top, and then the rest are all taken with Central America and the Caribbean. But I think it could be a fun exercise, and I can't help feeling we can improve on this. I'm a bit embarrassed to say I think Georgia's a little bit in the wrong place here. It looks a bit too far east to me compared to Turkey and Syria there. So I think maybe a bit of tectonic movements has happened there, and we've got Cyprus there, roughly where the Suez Canal should be, but it's really hard. So I think that's another sort of a fun exercise to do when looking at tile maps to see if there are certain situations where it's an interesting improvement. And the second idea, I've shown you design-driven data, and I think we were almost 50-50 whether that's a good idea. But if it's a fun idea, and if it's an idea that gets your creative ideas, or that gives you an idea of kind of look of a geometrical style visualization that you hadn't thought of before, then I would say have a think about it or have a look. The resources I've given for ideas, project33.com is what you can see on the right, and that's just a small amount of it. It's an amazing collection of vintage, geographic, slightly obscure album covers, but you can get some great ideas from there if you're interested. I've put as an example the Tate Modern there, any art piece might be an inspiration, video, movie posters, wallpaper. I've looked at wallpaper and used that as inspiration before, floor tiles, anything you like. Again, something with perhaps more time would be interesting. It's an interesting way to just sort of get your creative ideas going. Oh, and here, yes, this is my talk, so I'll get to show you a couple of my examples. This one from on the left is an album cover. I think it was a band called Lemon Jelly. And I had to think, well, what data could I put in there? How many colors are there? What's my palette? How many different Geometric features are there on each. So, most of them have got 2 blobs with, several different breakdowns, yet some of them got 1. And then I came up with the idea of looking at best actor and supporting actor nominations, and I had a lot of fun doing that. And similarly, this was just from one of the sort of the vintage Project 33 album covers. I found some football data from that day and just made a sort of simple version of that and tried to emulate it as much as I could. And it's so much fun, and it's a great way of learning new technical skills, of how you might rotate things, or how you might sort of place things in different layers and things like that. And my third breakout idea was for people who didn't really have access to that, which, so we're coming up to about a quarter of an hour left anyway, was let's see if this has prompted you for some questions that you think that, you might be interested to know the answer, or interested to know the group's opinion. And all of this is about, I'm interested to know your opinion as much as I hope you're interested to know my opinion. I'm glad we didn't have any 100-0 splits or anything particularly close, which just goes to show, I think there's a lot of debate to be had around most principles in data visualization. So I think this was just to show you that the Q&A tab there, you can put in some questions there and see if you've got some interesting suggestions. So I think, given that we've got 15 minutes or so, let's I want to encourage you, if you have the time or the inclination, or this sort of inspired you to think, well, let's do something creative, look at what you might want to do and break out one or two another time. But if we've got time for a couple of questions that have come through on the Q&A, or questions that you have there in the room, then let's put them through now. Okay. I see movement. We have some questions in the room. I'm afraid I can't hear.
My main question is, why is data visualization in businesses so much different than that in academia? Many of the examples that you showed here, I cannot imagine them in many social science journals, for example. So is it that in academia we have not been inventive enough, or is it just that we have different principles on how we do data visualization there?
I think what I love about data visualization is that there is such a wide range of uses, and potentially what I've shown here, there's not a great amount of use for academia or business, but that's not to say that you can't necessarily blur the boundaries a little bit. That maybe, for example, you can let me think of an example. You might be able to come up with a well, I think the maps, for example, are a good idea. I think tile maps are something which can be used in academia or in business. Your audience might not be very familiar with them, but I think if used properly, and if used where it's a genuine case where the importance of each individual tile, each individual country or state is equal, then that might be something that you might want to show for I don't know, for sales figures in business, or for clinical results or something within academia. It's very much, I think, it's a case of they say you need to sort of know the rules to know when it's okay to break them, and it's almost going the other way. It's like, how far can I break the rules to know, actually, if I'm taking this seriously, where's that line? Where can I go back, and what's it kind of okay to do in academia or in my role within business? But one thing I will say is you get really interesting, you get kind of better technical skills as well. So most of what I show, and if I show you something that's kind of unconventional, chances are I did that on a Sunday afternoon when I was a bit bored and I didn't want to mow the lawn outside, and I had a data set from a community project, and I thought, how can I make this look interesting? Or how can I make this look fun? And sometimes it would teach you things like, I'll give a Tableau example, but maybe, level of details or certain calculations that you think, I never got the hang of that when I was trying to do that at work. But now that I've tried to do it, to analyze these football scores or these movie ratings or something, I now understand. So I think there's benefits. There's benefits in stretching yourself, stretching your technical ability and your creativity that you can then bring back into how you show things academically or within business, even if you're not going to, you're not going to show them a big chart that looks like a flower, that kind of thing. Does that make sense?
Do you have additional questions for Neil from audience? I know that there is one question in the Q&A. Do you want me to read or?
Yes, if you don't mind. I've lost connection on my phone.
Yes. So the question is, you said that audience is encouraged to disagree, but we create visualizations to persuade them, don't we? If we are not sure about what we make, will we reach our goal?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I think you must be sure about what you make. I think when I say you're encouraged to disagree, I meant that very few of these things that we discussed, or very few things that we would say at all, are sort of black and white answers, are sort of yes or no. For example, the curved bar charts, they're not great practice, but sometimes it might be what your client wants, or sometimes it might just, the advantages may outweigh the disadvantages, that kind of thing. So I think you should be sure as a designer whether you are bending or breaking that principle, but doing it for the right reason. Maybe you're showing a chart which which someone like Edward Tufty might think, oh, that's full of chart junk, I hate it. But you might think, no, I think it needs this. I think it needs this level of impact. I know that I'm going against sort of what the perceived best practice is, but I think it gains more from that because this is what my client will see. This is what I would be able to talk through with him or her, that kind of thing. So I think it's when I mention you're encouraged to disagree, it's more about sort of being sure on whether you feel you're sticking with the right principles, or whether you're sort of happy with your design principles that you're taking and the reason you're taking them. And then once you do that, if you do that 100% confidently, you should be fine.
I think there is one more question from our online audience, and Juba will help me voice it.
Great workshop, thanks. So, question from Zoom participant. Do you make sketches before you start creating in visualization in Tableau? Do you use any tools, and which ones? Well, actually, there are two more questions from this participant. How do you analyze data and find focus before you're creating dashboards? And what tools do you use for this?
Okay, so in terms of sketching, yes, I do. I quite often sort of attend talks and get really inspired by people who really advocate using sketching, and I then think, oh, I think I do it a bit, but I don't do it enough as often as I should. And I think sketching beforehand is pretty much always a good idea. The one thing I would say is Tableau in particular, because it's quite easy to sort of get your teeth into the data and try lots of different things. Sometimes that's a little bit like the exploratory sketch anyway. Sometimes you might think, I'll try this, or try this, or try this. And you're looking at sort of 8 different initial ideas, which may, some which might show you something interesting and some which might not. The one thing I always say is I'm an appalling, with pen and paper, I'm really bad at drawing. I can draw a stick man, that's kind of it. So I think others might disagree, but I think it helps if you're quite confident of sketching and drawing in the first place to do that kind of sketch and draw, because I come from a really sort of logical and not artistic creative background, I quite like doing my initial exploration and the initial analysis in Tableau or in the tool that I'm using. I mean, you might be using something else, maybe using Data Wrapper or something like that, where you can just drag and drop and quite quickly see what's there, see what patterns are there, and then think, all right, let's combine my scribbled ideas here, let's combine what I've seen, and let's decide how we're going to do this.
Was the second half of this question. How do you analyze data and find focus before creating dashboards? What tools do you use for this?
Well, again, I tend to just use Tableau, or I use Excel. And most of my input data is in Excel. There are plenty of analytical tools or tools that you can use to reshape your data. I'm not hugely familiar with most of them, so a lot of what I'll do is sort of quite manually processing the data in Excel, and I'll always be looking at things and maybe sort of summing things up or doing a quick little check in there to see what I'm going to find, just to sort of sense check my data and see if I can find a story first. So it's a combination of that and initial exploration in my visualization tool in Tableau. Again, sort of before knowing exactly what it's going to look like, the chances are I'll be analyzing some of the main the main data in there just to see what patterns I can find to start with.
Thank you. Do you have any additional questions from the audience? I think no. Thank you, Neil, for joining us online.
Thank you so much for asking me along, and I'm sorry I can't join you for a beer after the event, or just sort of meet some of you now and talk about it. But thank you once again.
Thank you. Okay. Yes.
I forgot my stuff there, and I forgot that slide there too. But you mentioned that it's coming as a book. But I'll go back there, and then if you want to connect on Twitter or LinkedIn, then you can see my details there too.
Thank you.